Welcome to the talk on regenerative brands. Given the planetary crisis we are in, we can no longer follow marketing in the way it has been done over the ages. We need a new playbook for marketing and building brands. In this presentation, we hope to give you a peek into this new way of building regenerative brands. Let's begin. Brands are an invention of the 20th century, the mass consumption society, where we equaled happiness with consumption. In this era, brands were shaped to always deliver more, past the degree where the need was met. Branding tools were created to imbue the simplest of products with desire. That's how a fizzy drink became the promise of happiness, and a pair of jeans became the promise of freedom. The hangover of this era continues till date, which is why we continue to shave with 8-blade razors and wash clothes with detergents designed to take the toughest stains away, whereas the truth is we change our t-shirts once a day without having broken any sweat in them. We have been dealing in dehumanized growth. We have obsessed over growth that is solely focused on growing economic value and treated nature and people as dehumanized objects out of which the juice of profit must be extracted. And we have thus reached a point where our planet can no longer absorb the carbon output we are generating. We love to talk about sustainability, but sustainability is not enough because what is left to sustain today is a depleted amount. We need to think of adding back. We now need to move towards regeneration. Regeneration of land, regeneration of communities, regeneration of employees. We need to see people, communities, and nature not as objects, but as living beings that can flourish by adding back to. And the great thing is that this movement can be driven by brands, because brands enable the fundamental drives needed to make positive change happen, which are the desire to take action and the ability to participate. Just look at our reaction to P&G Mothers or the Dove Sketches campaign. Brands are repositories of emotion that can move us to action. And secondly, the pervasive nature of brands allows a huge number of people to engage with them and take positive action. When Patagonia organizes events to recirculate their old jackets, it works. Ben & Jerry's creates mass participation and influences policies around BLM and LGBTQ rights, and the Generation Z responds to it. Therefore, brands are wonderful agents of rebuilding the world because they can make communities take action. And that is good news. Just as the bees and the flowers and the rivers and the mountains coexist in harmony, regenerative brands have a new way of seeing harmonious growth. They advocate growth through a harmonious relationship between the business and its ecosystem which it is made of, which is the community with real aspirations, the suppliers and partners who produce the product, the employees who seek fulfillment, and the planet that hosts us all. Therefore, growth in the regenerative paradigm will not mean gain for the shareholder alone, but regeneration for the whole ecosystem, making the whole ecosystem flourish and thrive. So, what will be the new strategies which regenerative brands will follow. Let us look. Step 1. Rebuild. Regenerative brands follow a logic of rebuilding. They do not compete with leaders, but attempt to replace them. They begin from the fact that the way a core human being's need has been fulfilled today is wrong. And they rebuild the solution from scratch, challenging habits and conventions. A great example of this is Oatly. Oatly reimagines milk. Realizing the climate damage the dairy industry is causing, by humans drinking milk meant for calves, Oatly rebuilds a new category of plant-based milk for humans. Interface Flooring reimagines its factory as a natural forest to produce flooring solutions. And therefore, as it creates its flooring solutions, it sequesters carbon in the soil and recycles water. So rebuilding is fundamentally reimagining the offering minus the waste and harm and adding back to people, planet, and prosperity. The next thing that regenerative brands do is that they pare back and focus on fans. Regenerative brands serve a smaller community of fans by having a strong degree of empathy for them, and they strongly focus on demassifying the solution. Classic marketing tends to slant towards feature inflation and feature profusion. But what regenerative brands do is they strip down to the frills, answering a real core need to deliver tangible value free of fluff. A great example of this is the Dollar Shave Club. It gives us high quality shaving solutions with none of the unnecessary features. Or look at Dacia. These cars focus on the essential. They are pared back to deliver on what really matters. In a sense, regenerative brands realize that less is indeed more, and they work around this core principle. The next principle or tenet of regenerative brands is to reinvent abundance. Regenerative brands do not compromise on joy. In fact, they cleverly use R&D to deliver deeply on enjoyment, but while doing good to all. A great example of this, as we can see, is Live Kindly. It gives you great tasting food rather than a poor tasting plant-based burger patty, which does good to the environment. Tesla does not create dull cars that are good for the planet, but rather create exciting cars that deliver incredible acceleration. In sum, regenerative brands don't use guilt and shame and cut back, but rather they deliver more joy while equally adding back to the planet. The other things that regenerative brands do is they look at the value chain as a benefit and as an attractive proposition. They remove the black box around the way their products are made. And they use the power of this transparency and authenticity to drive positive perception. A great example of this is Moyee coffee, which processes and roasts the coffee in the country of origin so that more than 50% of the profits stay back with the coffee growers and producers. And it uses blockchain so that the people who buy their coffee, in countries outside, when they buy this coffee, they can see how their dollar is going back into the hands of the coffee growers. And this creates, appetite to buy more of this brand of Moyee coffee. Therefore, regenerative brands transform the value chain and the route to market into a powerful source of branding. The next thing that regenerative brands do is that they replace mythology with utopia. The old brands were myth-centric. But regenerative brands are utopia centric. In the past, brands manipulated buyers by selling dreams of the cowboy, the playboys, and the glamour girls. But building regenerative brands requires a focus on the real. Regenerative brands need to drive new behaviors that will shape the new utopia. We could take the example of Nike. When they support Colin Kaepernick, they help create a utopian world. A world where a person should not be marginalized for their views on injustice. Or when Chobani supports marginalized communities through its products. It becomes a beacon that appeals to our better nature to build a better world. In short, instead of using mythologies to manipulate, regenerative brands bring people together to build a utopian world. And the other interesting thing that regenerative brands do is that they move from claims to stories. In the past, we used superlative claims of stronger, better, shinier to stimulate growth. But regenerative brands realize that in a Google-powered world, claims to perfection are not sustainable. In contrast, they see the business as a continuous journey and acknowledge their imperfection. Therefore, claims are replaced by constructs of rich stories that leverage social media as opposed to the 30-second TVC. VEJA sneakers are a great example. They have gained immense popularity, and they use stories. They refuse to advertise and instead show us stories on social media on how they support the local community, how they source their product in a very ethical manner. They bring the utopia they are building to life. In short, regenerative brands leverage the authentic magnetism of stories rather than forcing claims through TV adverts. The next thing that regenerative brands do is they remove friction. In today's tech-enabled world, friction removal is welcomed. And in a very practical way, friction can be removed through one-click purchase and subscriptions. But mental friction is created by doubt around the negative impact that a brand is making. And what regenerative brands do is they reduce this mental friction with entertaining transparency. You only have to think of the packaging of Tony Chocolonely. If you open the wrapper and you see the entertaining and informative illustrations inside, or if you look at the packaging of Oatly, the box, it is a joy to read and interact with this packaging. So these are great examples of removing mental friction through entertaining transparency. In short, and very crucially, regenerative brands change the algorithm from business to consumer to community to community. In the world of mass consumption, businesses saw people as consumers. The entire job of market research was to identify the insight, the strategic weak spot to manipulate the consumer. The operating equation was business to consumer. But what regenerative brands do is they operate on a new equation of community to community. Regenerative brands don't see them as consumers, but more as a community of people with real aspirations, acknowledging their humanity and intelligence. If you look at Ella's Kitchen, Brewdog, VEJA, each of these brands dedicatedly serve and grow their well-defined communities. And importantly, regenerative businesses see themselves as communities. In the past, marketers may have been mercenaries with mind manipulation skills, but in regenerative companies, they authentically believe in their calling and they live the brand. Till now, marketing people were pretty, painters and seducers. But now, the company comes together as a community guided by a purpose. A good example of this is Michel and Augustine, the cookie company, where everyone in the senior management has a baking degree. Or if we look at Walls, the ice cream, everyone in the company practices the brand value of inclusive happiness and makes a difference to the society around them. So, in summary, regenerative brands thrive when a community of humanized businessmen become useful to a community of people with real needs. Finally, measurement. All these new marketing tools mentioned above are really of no value if we continue to define success through shareholder returns. We require new benchmarks to measure the prosperity of the entire ecosystem. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, offer us wonderful, concrete pillars to measure how we contribute to the world holistically. So does the BIA from B Corp. It's a wonderful tool that allows us to measure and plan. We therefore have to arm ourselves with new ways to measure the impact on our ecosystem and use it to navigate our way forward as businesses. We just can't focus on the classic annual report that shows profit delivered to the shareholder. We have to measure holistically. We have to measure the ecosystem impact. To conclude, how do we move from being extractive to being regenerative? Here are the key steps you may want to keep in mind. Step 1, identify a community to serve and frame a purpose for this community to rebuild the world. Step 2, start living this purpose in your organization through a mobilizing change idea. Let everyone practice and live this value, this purpose. Step 3, move from claims to stories. Step 4, invite community participation to rebuild the utopia. Step 5, drive growth and good at the same time through value chain innovation, through impact innovation. And step number 6, measure stakeholder prosperity, the ecosystem prosperity, and not just shareholder profit. We hope you found this useful to reassess your approach to marketing. And we are very happy to engage with you and discuss with you and build solutions with you. So from all of us at Innate Motion, I say goodbye and let's talk.